I wanted to address the reconstruction question because I think it also raises the broader question, as you pointed out, of how to think about the future of Bashar al-Assad. To my mind, this is the fundamental contradiction in American policy right now. Amanda pointed out a number of tensions or contradictions. To me, this is far and away the central one. We have General Votel acknowledging we're not going to fight Assad. In the wake of the Russian intervention, there's no realistic chance of Assad being displaced. We're not even really trying to arm and train insurgents to achieve that goal. And we don't really seem to want that goal because even if it somehow could be achieved, we're not really sure how to control the mayhem that would inevitably result as those 500,000 deaths were avenged, most of them having been caused by the regime and its chemical weapons use, its barrel bombing, its artillery against apartment buildings, and so forth. So realistically, we don't have a way to think about Assad or his future. I think the Geneva process is counterproductive, not just a long shot, but counterproductive, because it deludes us into thinking we have a political strategy when we don't. And I would rather see it simply terminated or fundamentally redefined along the following lines. Let's acknowledge there is not going to be a negotiated transition of power in Syria in the short term, period. There isn't, because for Assad, that is snatching defeat from the jaws of battlefield victory. It's just that simple for him. He watched what happened in Iraq. This is the mirror image. If a minority group that had power for many years loses power, their group will suffer retaliation. That is the number one lesson of the Iraqi civil war, and Assad, I think, has at least interpreted the lesson in those terms. Others may want to disagree with me in a second. They'll certainly have that chance if they wish. But my bottom line is that the only thing we can hope for with Assad is that he allow autonomous governance in some of these more remote areas, and we should work hard on a full-bore reconstruction effort there, and even try to persuade the World Bank and other foreign donors to work with these subnational entities as they emerge. But we should also recognize Assad's going to stay in Damascus for some foreseeable amount of time, and our best hope is to try to persuade him to choose his own successor and hold up on the major reconstruction aid until he does for those parts of the country that he controls. And then as he does hand off power, we can at least try to get more Sunni Arab and Kurdish representation at the cabinet level and the advisory level in the future government, but recognizing that it's not going to be dominated by those groups, even though together they are the majority of the population inside of Syria. It's not going to be a democratic, majoritarian political transition because Assad will not allow it. And even if he himself could be incentivized by Russia to go find a dacha on some nice Russian lake and live in exile, he's not going to do that to his fellow Alawites. He's not going to desert them and leave them at the mercy of these sectarian groups who, even though the war is not simply a sectarian war, nonetheless it has a dimension, an aspect along those lines. And the Alawites will suffer enormously, in my judgment, if there is any kind of a future majoritarian government, unless we get extremely lucky. And Assad's not going to count on luck, especially when he's basically won the war on the battlefield. So it's got to be a managed transition to a successor that Assad himself likely and largely chooses. Our main leverage is with reconstruction aid to withhold the spigot being fully opened for areas like Damascus until Assad has chosen an acceptable successor that the Sunni Muslims and Kurds can at least tolerate and don't feel have been, killing them in large numbers the way that Assad and his inner circle have been. So that's how I think we have to rethink the political strategy and link it to the reconstruction strategy. You can give some humanitarian aid to the areas that Assad controls in the short term, but you got to withhold the massive reconstruction aid for the central cities until Assad is gone, but recognize it's not going to be Geneva that chooses the successor. It's going to be a more indirect and Assad-driven process. That's